Hello everyone, welcome back. It's the second session of day 2 and we are going to be looking at why cloud native is essential to delivering the automation, agility and innovation needed to support new services. So please grab your coffees, get back to your tables because move over AI, it's cloud native time. Because we want to know really what cloud native, I emphasize, means for network operators and of course their customers, and why it's an essential step not only to the success of 5G standalone and beyond that to the ongoing evolution towards DSPs. And how can they accelerate this journey? What can they learn from cloud-first developers, and how can they work with cloud services providers? Lots of questions and talking points to get through, and of course we welcome your contributions as well during the discussion. But first of all, let me introduce my co-host for this session, and I'm pleased to say Arnaud Vamparys, who is the Chief Technology and Information Officer for Orange Europe, is joining us. Arnaud, it's good to see you and thank you very much for taking part. This is a terrific topic really. We've been covering it for a number of years now, and it seems that cloud native really is essential to the evolution of telcos.
Exactly. I will try to explain how we handle it inside Orange and what are the key points to succeed in this cloud native culture.
Great, well, we're looking forward to this. But first of all, let's introduce our other guests, starting from my far right. And if you can have name, job titles and companies, that'd be great. So Sebastiano.
Sure, Sebastiano Tevaroto. I'm from Optiva, a BSS and charging software provider based in California. And my role is a customer success champion. And we really mean customer success. That's the role. In traditional roles, it would be a commercial sales officer, commercial officer, but it's a customer champion that I like my best.
So Sebastiano, it's good to see you again. We've known each other for a long number of years now, so it's good to see you on.
I don't want to mention the number of years.
And Heather.
I'm Heather Kirksey. I am the VP of Community and Ecosystem for the open networking projects that we have at the Linux Foundation.
Great to see you, Heather. Always a pleasure for you being here with us at DSP. You've been here before, so I look forward to your contributions as well, obviously. And next to Heather.
I am Partha Sitala. I'm the president of the Cloud Business Unit at Rakuten Symphony. And I came into Rakuten through the acquisition of a company, Silicon Valley-based company called Robin.io, where I was the founder and CEO. Great.
Well, thank you, Partha. And we only spoke last week online, yes. But there's so much to talk about in Cloud Native that we're going to continue today. Thanks very much for being here. And if I cross over to my left, it's a return to the stage to Sean.
Yeah. So Sean Hockel, again, in Azure for Operators within Microsoft. I own product strategy for the application of cloud technology to the core network itself.
Good to have you back here, Sean. And next to Sean.
Hello, Ignacio Gonzalez. I'm part of Red Hat team. Looking after mobile networks, let's say technologies across EMEA, RAN, 5G core, private networks, etc.
Great. Ignacio, thanks very much for joining us. It's good to have you, because first time at
I'm the rookie guy, yeah.
Excellent. Welcome. Well, welcome everyone. Before we get into our discussion, I am going to invite Arnaud to take to the lectern to deliver the DSP Leaders Address. Please, Arnaud.
Thanks, Guy. So just to perhaps give a bit of insight how to move to a cloud-native network and cloud-native culture for a company. Perhaps 3 points. The first one is to define the right vision because you are not a greenfield operator, so it's very important to understand how this transformation benefits to the business. And the second point is then to have the right roadmap implementation, because it's a step-by-step approach, and I will explain how we handle it inside Orange. And perhaps the third point will be around how to create the right ecosystem, the right organization, the right processes, the right skills, as mentioned yesterday in the first session, and how to select and find the right partner for that. So perhaps on the first point, on the vision one, it's really inside our Lead the Future strategic plan that we announced beginning of the year. where we, of course, want to benefit from our #1 position as a fiber company in Europe. We are roll out more fiber than any other player here in Europe. As Orange, we are operating, as you know, in 27 countries in Europe and Africa, Middle East. And in Europe, we really invest a lot already in this fiber deployment, and we continue to do so in the next years. We want as well to have a beneficial for our customer on the mobile network. So it's really around quality of services, level of security, how to move to this 5G SA with the right slicing capabilities, with a capability to define a level of security and quality for each customer process, especially for our B2B customer, but as well for our B2C customers. So we have put inside Lead the Future really the industrial model for network. And there, it's very important for us because we want to be able to scale, to have benefits from this cloud, data, and AI new technologies, to have more agility, resilience, and of course, performance for our customers. So there, we have defined really 2 processes where we want to be at automation level 4 in 2025. It's around the network monitoring and the network changes. So you have inside this life cycle management where we can be 30 to 300 times faster than today to change elements on our network. And it's fundamental to master, of course, cloud-native technologies for that. So we definitely need to put the right ecosystem. Of course, first we need to define the implementation roadmap, how it can benefit to the business. So we already are using cloud-native technologies for quite a long time on our service platform, on our IT loads, and more recently for our B2B customer. When we moved from IP/MPLS to SD-WAN, we really introduced foundation, cloud-native foundation for that, to really be able to connect, change, disconnect any customer sites on a worldwide basis for Orange Business. And then we start to use that as well for a simple network load, more control plane than user plane. And step by step, we had to master that. And now it's quite a big year, 2023, for that, because we are introducing 5G SA. It's 6 of our operation. We just opened beginning of the year, for example, 5G Plus, the 5G SA technology behind in Spain. And for us really to be able to automate this life cycle management of our network for a big element, that is the core network, because you have inside, of course, all the data of the customer flowing, all the control plane, and the database as well. So 3 key elements you have to master with very different capabilities, in fact, with very different way to manage it from operation perspective. And of course, we need to do that at a time where our environment asks us to be very resilient, to be trusted, to be secure as Europe, and of course, with some rules defined country by country. So we are in this process right now, and so doing this core network part, and the third wave will be really on the access side with Cloud Run, where we already are doing small-scale deployment. For example, we announced deployment in Romania with Vodafone on a shared network for rural areas. So it's a step-by-step approach, and of course, we need to change the full ecosystem around it. So some years ago, we created a dedicated infrastructure department. So before, on the network side, we have FAN, fixed access network, RAN, transport, core network, and we have now, from quite a long time now, an infrastructure department with the design of the whole infrastructure for the company and the selection of the right partners for that. So the Orange YAS. We start with VNF at that time, moving now to CNF, cloud native functions. And doing that, it's a way to start to mix the culture, because we need this department, but as well a strong link with the network expertise, and to start to mix that together. And it was important to do that quite in advance, because we cannot touch the SLA. We need to keep the same performance than before. We are quite number one in quality in many of our operations on the mobile network, for example. So we have to take these constraints from day one, to put inside this security by design, to put inside some other elements, depending of which part of the network we are talking about. And then, before to put it on field, we need to practice. So there were a big move of training, internal training, reskilling, upskilling, and as well we need to give all our engineers the capability to practice. So we formed 3 years ago a program called PKO to create an end-to-end cloud-native, automative 5G SA network for all the elements to be present with OSS, BSS included, really to learn scale. We use that, by the way, in some of our sites as employees. It's one of the networks we use. So as well to have our network operations center, Europe, managing this small internal network, really to be able to understand how to mix as well things between the traditional network we have and this new greenfield cloud native network. It helped us to design all the tooling we needed around it, and as well how to make the integration of the network, how to move. Before we had integration network that was just the sum of 50 to 80 elements, where you validate each element and then you do end-to-end test. And we move that to a next generation that is a network integration factory, where you are able to take different software and to distribute them on your integration network, and then to the pre-production of each of our operations. So it was quite a good move for that, just to have the right de-risking before to deploy, to have as well the right design, the right help from many of our partners, and I would like to thank them to really gave us as well some keys how to transform ourselves there. And still in that journey, if I step back a bit, we are still suffering fragmentation. I should explain. It's not so easy to decorate the network load today from this infrastructure. We have big silos, it's called hyperscaler. We have as well many ways to develop software, network software, and it's not the same for a database from a controlling plane, for example. So we have really to defragment things, and we want to do it as a Europe scale. That's why we announced quite recently in November last year, and I take opportunity to have a Linux Foundation on the round table here, to launch a Silva project, an open source project, really to help this defragmentation, to help us in our journey to move this 50 to 80 elements step by step to cloud-native technologies. I think the fact that 5G SA was cloud-native by default in standard really helped our community to move, and because it gave really an obligation to move to these technologies. And we still have this risk of fragmentation that we need to address all together, and really to work on that to enable us really to build this network integration factory, and to have the right way as well to run it inside our network operations center, Europe. It's not only technology, of course, so it's very important for me and with my colleagues to share it internally in the company, what it means, what are the benefits for the business. It's true that today we are changing many parameters already. If I just take the RAN domain, every month we are changing 12 million parameters. and we cannot do that manually, of course. It helps us to have the best quality per customer, to reduce the energy consumption of the RAN. It's just an example. So imagine when Cloud RAN will arrive with the potential of automation it will bring as well for us. It will be very good at a time where we want to introduce slicing capabilities in our operation. So it's very beneficial. It's really part of Lead the Future, our strategic plan. And I think we have now very good insights during this roundtable. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Arnaud. Lots of great information there from Arnaud. And as Arnaud makes his way back to the desk, we should take a look at the viewer poll that we have for this session. And here's a question we're asking you all. How can DSPs maximize the cloud-native opportunity? So, as usual, it's on the TelecomTV website. If you're watching online, please go ahead, tick whichever ones you think are most applicable. You can tick more than one, of course. And even those of you in the room, please go ahead and take part in this. And we'll look at the results towards the end of the session. But I must just come back to the AI native session we've just held, because I thought I'd ask GPT-4 the question that we were asking our audience. And I asked GPT-4, or Zen, as we call it, what are the main challenges for telcos in becoming AI native? And the number one answer it told me was that most telcos currently deploy AI in limited ways that will not drive sustainable at-scale success. And incidentally, if you were watching earlier, that was our lowest ranked answer in our poll. So make of that as whatever you want, I don't know. Right, on with our discussion, because it's cloud native time. And actually, we've had a little chat before we started, and a very good thing to get right from the outset is, what is cloud native? And you know, I think partly this is an ideal question for you, with your background, to explain to us all what we mean when we talk cloud native here, and not to confuse it with cloud.
Yeah, certainly. I think this is a very important question, especially in the context of telcos. And the reason I say it's important is because, right from the prior conferences that I've been to, people, confuse or interchangeably use cloud and cloud native. I think that should first be corrected, right? So I'll take this opportunity to actually explain what that is. When we talk about cloud, the word association is usually with the public cloud, the hyperscalers, right? Whether it's Azure or Google Cloud and AWS and so on. And what that offers is the almost seemingly instantaneous ability for you to scale up and down your resources based on your consumption, right? The second thing it offers is essentially pay for what you're using. Cloud native has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It's a very poor choice of words. It's almost like, in the past, JavaScript versus Java. They have nothing to do with each other, right? But that word stuck, and it caused a lot of confusion in the earlier days. So what is cloud native? So cloud native essentially is a philosophy using which you have to build applications. And that delivers, if you want to simplify it, just three distinct benefits, right? The first one is how you package your applications. Because the biggest struggle that, whether it's a telco operator or an enterprise has, is that a vendor brings an application, there's so many dependencies that just to get that application onboarded into your network itself takes months. So that's the first thing that cloud native solves. And the way it solves is that it basically says, you got to package all your dependencies together, and that's the whole idea behind containers. It's one of the underlying technology underpinnings of cloud native, right? So that's the first one. The second one is, everybody in the industry before cloud native came along handled application availability and resiliency very specific to their own application. Now, what is the problem with that? The problem with that is, if you are an operator or an enterprise, you would have to go buy third-party tools to figure out how to make each of your different applications available. It's very difficult for staffing up so many people, figuring out so many different toolkits and so on, right? So the second thing that cloud native brought is a consistent way in which you build your application, mind you, the way you build your application, so that the resiliency is basically taken care by the platform consistently across any type of application, right? And the third one is essentially the life cycle of your application. upgrading your applications is a pain. And everybody who has done that actually understands this. So that's the third benefit that cloud native brings. How do you bring consistency so that you upgrade your applications regardless of whether you're doing, in fact, in the telco world, let's say you're doing RAN or core. I understand we are far away from that reality, but that is the way cloud native is essentially designed. So I would basically say that it's very important, especially as operators, if you're evaluating cloud native, you hold your vendors honest to what cloud native truly is. It is not cloud. It's an application design philosophy.
Thanks, Parth.
But hold a second. Totally agree about part of that. And very eloquent explanation. But I think cloud and cloud native go together because cloud native is about simplification of a very complex world according to certain lines. If you really want to take advantage of cloud, whether it is private or public, you better be cloud native. Otherwise, you don't. Right? All of the flexibilities, agility, scalability, and everything that we talk about as benefits for cloud, right, are not completely achieved unless you're cloud native. Period. Right? So cloud native is essential to cloud. Right? It's not separate. Right?
So let's move this on. And Arnaud, let me come to you first. Given what cloud native is, given what cloud native isn't, how important is the adoption of cloud native to CSPs as they transition towards digital services providers? How essential a component is it?
It's really crucial today. For 5GSA, it's mandatory. So it's the question, do I have to do it or not? It's really in our journey. As I mentioned, we are scaling to 6 operations for this core network part. With different partners like Ericsson, Oracle, Nokia, for example. It's something that we really need. We are doing in 2 steps. Because of this fragmentation and application design and so on, we decide to limit the complexity of the first step with what is called vendor IaaS, so really to move that way. But with a design we are doing to have something equivalent on the different elements to be able to step by step when we have a better foundation. And I hope Silva will bring things on that for Europe. And then it's allow us already not to be lost in different tooling in different ways to handle it. And that's why we had this PKO program to invent the tooling for multi-countries operator, these 27 countries where we operate.
Thanks, Arnaud. And Sean, not only how important is this on this transition, but how important is it that a telco adopts this throughout the organization?
Yeah, I think it's the first time I've been on stage where somebody said, hey, you can have no cloud and cloud native, but it's interesting. Maybe it's helpful if I describe sort of the journey that I see a lot of the operators going through right now. So essentially, if you think about it, in the old, and I used to build services at a big operator, so this is sort of where my perspective is coming from. You had a set of services that could be delivered through physical, through physical vertically integrated solutions because you're a relatively simple set of services on the network. And then as the services mix on the network got increasingly complex, what people were finding is they needed to simplify at least some portion of that, and they disaggregated, right? That's where you got to the SDN NFV space solutions where you disaggregated the hardware layer from the software layer. And what happened in that case is that's where you sort of saw the growth of what we'll call DIY clouds or private clouds. And those solutions use some of the elements of sort of how solutions are built in the cloud. And what happened there was, sure, people save money at the CapEx layer, but then the operational complexity of those solutions grew significant, in some cases eating up the value. And that's where I think a lot of people are today for those that have decided to go down sort of the journey of moving to that. What we ultimately see, and this is sort of where we see people going today is the adoption of a hybrid cloud based on public cloud services. So that doesn't mean you're moving your network into the public cloud. The fact of the matter is there's physics that say you're going to have to compute, network, and storage. But a big chunk of cloud and cloud-native services is using those hyperscale capabilities, the services for observability, for security, for AI, for automation. Those are tools that are honed at scale for hundreds of thousands of organizations around the globe, whether they be enterprise, governments, or carriers, and being able to leverage that scale into your solutions. And so ultimately we see this as a progression. So you've got the progression, the early steps from sort of the traditional vertically integrated stack to a disaggregated stack with what I'll call the DIY tooling, which, by the way, the IT group did the same thing, right? That's essentially what HPUX and Sun Solaris and RISC 6000 were. But ultimately, they ended up at hyperscale platforms because of the cost advantage over time and the ecosystem. And that's the trend we're seeing in the conversations with operators now as people are evaluating their upgrade to 5GSA, as they're looking at retiring either their traditional physical appliances or these sort of DIY virtualization stacks or private cloud stacks. They're thinking, how do I move to the next layer so I can start integrating all of this stuff that I'm seeing in other industries that people want to implement. And then, again, this was a discussion based around how does that affect you as a service provider? Well, your customers, whether it be AI will have a big impact on the consumer customer, so being closer to the sources of where that technology lies today, obviously is going to help deliver a smoother experience and allow you to participate in that growth. And similarly, on the enterprise side, the growth in the enterprise applications is coming with SaaS-based services and cloud-based services. Recognize that that's not all, they're also coming in the more traditional stuff, but that's, the operators that have aligned that way expect to participate in that growth. And that's, maybe a little less sort of, I agree with all the definition of how you describe the services layer of cloud native makes sense. Just from a very practical perspective, how we see the evolution of the industry for the adoption of cloud native services. And then, of course, the exciting thing about that is that you can leverage all those things like rapid turnaround software, so you can build with agile development techniques. You can build fail-fast services, right? And go from there. I'm going to stop there because I'll wax poetic for a little bit, but it's obviously, this is the reason I left an operator to go to a hyperscaler, is because I strongly believe in this transition.
Sean, all great insights. All insights are welcome. It's great. It links really nicely to our second talking point. These two are kind of interlinked, really. And Heather, I'd like to put this to you because you've been banging the drum for some time. And I guess in earlier days, not all telcos understood cloud native. How is it changing? Do you think telcos now, generally telcos, now understand cloud native culture? And are they prepared to make these necessary operational changes to be truly cloud native?
Yeah, it has changed dramatically since I've been doing this. I remember early days saying things like CI/CD, on a panel, with operators on it. They were like, eh. And now they're like, now we have to figure out how to implement CI/CD, how to get our NOC on board with it. It's how, not if. And so that's been, I think, a big transition. And I think also just seeing the success, of other, regulated and complex industries like finance and banking and oil and gas and things like that, seeing them adopt it, and seeing success there has really helped. And and there've been some early adopters, especially a lot of the big investors in some of the open source who are sort of further along on that journey. But I think it's getting better now. We are talking about those sort of operational issues, because I would say one way that I've seen it change is that it used to be a technology discussion. And of course, then, I work with developer communities. We talk about technology, but now it is on the operations. It is on the how do we leverage that instead of how do I use Kubernetes? It's now how do I leverage this to improve my business, to get the rapidity, the resiliency, all of those kinds of things. So I think the fact that the conversation has shifted to how and to sort of leveraging the benefits is a sign that large chunks of our ecosystem are now on the journey as opposed to contemplating the journey.
Good to hear. Thank you, Heather. And Ignacio, if I could bring you into the conversation at this point, are you seeing a similar feedback from customers? It's not how it's how they do it rather than if they should or why should they?
Yeah, let me use an example. Jokes aside. I guess it's like in an automotive conference, if they're talking about if electricity is needed for electric cars. I guess we can go back to there that, yes, cloud native is going to be needed for the telcos. And it's something that is happening, actually. Of course, we can distinguish what is doing tier ones or tier threes. It's true. Maybe the implementation is totally different due to resources. That is happening. Also, we are seeing more and more RFQs and questions coming from CSPs asking, okay, what about if I want to start doing this proper decoupling? I want to have my infrastructure, I want to build my telco cloud, and how I'm going to address the onboarding process of the different CNFs. This is something that we are seeing more and more over the last 2 years. So I guess in terms of this culture and understanding what is the benefit of a cloud-native platform for the telco is already there.
Great, thank you. And Arnaud, Orange Europe, you've got a number of regional companies within Orange Europe. Within the whole organisation, is everyone aligned? Because there's a lot of people involved who've got to be understanding of what it truly means to be cloud native.
Yes, the alignment is quite easy when in the beginning of the process you define the same industrial strategy, so the same partners, the same way to implement it, and then of course the real question it was for us this network integration factory setup, and on 5GSA. We still are a quite regulated, let's say, sector. So especially in Europe, we have sometimes rules a bit different, countries by countries. And for example, for the CI/CD part, it's not so obvious to be authorized to have one global CI connected to directly to different CD and in the different operations. So sometimes you have to decouple it in a certain way. To keep this, and it's important, this trusted and secure connectivity we are offering to all our customers, to all the citizens. So it's really okay. Sometimes you have good technological concept, but you need to adapt them to your environment. And I think that now we are mastering that piece.
Great, that's good. That's good to hear. Before we go into more detail, we'll stick at this little general level. Are there any questions from our audience at this stage on, shall we say, the fundamentals of cloud native and applications to telcos? There's a hand over on the right-hand side. Oh, hello, Neil. Microphone behind you.
There's a surprise.
Hello. I wanted to challenge something Sean said about costs and capability of the public cloud. So, I've analysed this many times. In fact, we tried to deploy a few things into the public cloud. And what we found was it was expensive and quite often didn't work because of constraints within the public cloud that probably aren't well understood. So we put an SBC app in there and we just couldn't make it work. So are you really able to deliver telco workloads? Question number one. Question number two, are you really able to do that in a cost-effective way? And then question number three, so here in the UK we have a thing called TSA, Telecom Security Act. Are the public cloud providers willing to sign up to that act? Because in order for operators in the UK to leverage the cloud and do more cloud native stuff in the public cloud, for me that feels like a prerequisite. And I really want to be clear with those out there that what is the best path. Right now we see operators building their own cloud to deliver their workloads because actually they're not able to make them work. And I just wanted to challenge that assertion that was made earlier on.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that comes up fairly often. So one, for example, you can look at the press release MTN put out just after Mobile World Congress, where they had run their 5GSA core in Azure, not for full deployment, but scale. AT&T runs tens of millions of subscribers today on Microsoft technology for their network. So from my perspective, people can do it. Did AT&T sign up to a massive increase in cost to do that? Absolutely not. That was one on the basis of a TCO model against their current operating model. Now, obviously, with every individual operator, you're going to have to work through the TCO of that. There's some design choices that we're finding we're having to make with operators in terms of managing. The one that's most commonly quoted is the egress and ingress costs, or the egress costs of the network. We have methodologies for working around that with the operators that we've scaled with. I think this notion that it can't work is surprising. So from that perspective, in policy questions, I'm not a policy guy. So we'll have to defer that to later, unfortunately. But it is something. I spend a ton of time working with operators in the world. Again, addressing most of the policy concerns is the same discipline you apply in financial services, the same discipline you apply in healthcare, who are also heavily regulated industries, where you have to go through a formalized data classification exercise. You need cloud-native capabilities in order to make sure that you've got fine-grained role-based access controls around who can access what data and when, and which processes by when. You need to be able to demonstrate compliance. So a lot of the compliance tools that are built in the cloud that let you demonstrate who's touched what when are important to delivering that. And then finally, using cloud-native technology in terms of the CI/CD process is building that composable architecture, which allows you to guarantee where certain services sit, not just optimized from a technology perspective, but to comply with how your regulations state not just where data can place, but where processing can occur, and in many cases, who's allowed to access. There's a three-way nexus. And that's all stuff that has been done not just for telco, but for other industries, and we can leverage into the model. And again, so that's the value of being able to bring the innovation that comes from other regulated industries, large government deployments, to the table, because you're not building that from scratch yourself. You're not DIYing it yourself and then having to go back to the regulators and prove that it works for something you've done individually. We can build on the efforts of others and bring that to the table. And that's my experience. So little different than maybe some of what other folks have experienced.
Thank you, Sean. I do want to move on because there's a few other areas we want to get through on our discussion. Arnaud, panelists mentioned applications earlier, but what does cloud native, how does it lead to the creation of new agile application models, and what does this mean for new DSP provided services?
It's true that one aspect we are looking for to in this cloud native network, it's really the agility. I mentioned to be faster, but we have other elements there. If, for example, you have a big demand on B2B, with the 5G SA introduction, so we really need to be able to tailor, let's say, the public network to leverage the public network investment to be able to give a virtual private network with extension on site to any B2B site, and there we really need some new agile application models. We need as well to adapt our operational model around it. And I do think what is important to keep in mind is that in most cases you have different elements that are traditional network elements and new cloud native elements, and you have to master that in a common way for your customers. So you need to hide this complexity. By the way, it's natural for us as operator, but it's really something to be understood from the beginning. Because if not, if you just think you can add these cloud native elements and continue to run independently your traditional network element, then you will fail to keep the right SLA. That means the right mean time to repair, the right detections of problems in a more proactive way. And really, we don't want any compromise as Orange. When we move to these new technologies, we want to have same SLA or even better for some elements.
Great, thanks, Arnaud. And I'd like to come to you, Partha, and get your thoughts on this and how some of these new agile application models can help telcos here.
Yeah, I think, first of all, as I said earlier, right, the architectural philosophy behind cloud native enables agility. And I'll give you a few examples how we have done it at Rakuten Mobile and also our other customers, right? So let's look at it in different stages. The first thing is, how do you make the onboarding of your vendors' applications very fast? That's one aspect of agility, right? Sean mentioned, Heather mentioned this. CI/CD is becoming a reality now. And it's becoming a reality also because of this philosophy. The packaging of applications enables a clean CI/CD pipeline through which you can take a vendor's build, put it through your staging, your test, and then push it to production. So that's one aspect of agility. The second aspect of agility is, okay, now that you have all this up and running, you have to monitor it, and then you have to act on what you're really seeing, right? What the counters are telling you. Do you need to scale a certain service? Do you need to shut it down, right? Those kind of things. You essentially can do it much faster now because it's a software-driven way in which you can monitor and act on through policies, right? So there's the other way of looking at agility. The third way of looking at agility is because there is standardization across different application classes, you can essentially build an automation framework that will allow you to accomplish lifecycle management for your workloads. That's the third way of bringing agility into the network. And from our practical experience at Rakuten Mobile, we have seen that cloud native certainly allows us to be agile. And of course, the end business benefits are, number one, we can drive down costs. We can increase the correctness through which we can essentially accept new builds from our vendors, right? And we can spin up newer services much faster, right? Not measured in months anymore. It could actually also be days or even hours sometimes.
Thanks, Partha. Sebastiano, this seems so obvious to telcos. The benefits, when Partha puts it like this, the benefits seem so clear. Do you advocate the same benefits? Do you see the same reasons for?
Absolutely. Look, I think I want to take a slightly different angle to what Sean said to reinforce the power of what he said. And it starts with going to cloud, and public or private, and cloud native as a condition is a business decision. It has to be a business decision. It is a business decision that requires a technology answer to support it, but it is a business decision. And honestly speaking, is a bit of an oxymoron because it's a business decision that the market has taken for us already. So it's not like you have a choice. You have a choice to die, or you have a choice to embrace. And I think the embracing is obviously what we want. When we look at from a charging and BSS standpoint, we are cloud native because our customers and the need of our customers today and tomorrow are cloud native. And that includes obviously the BSS, which is a bit more of a traditional IT domain, if you will, or charging, that is a bit more of a traditional network domain, or the way things are, this hybrid. I mean, the architecture that Arnaud is pushing to Orange is exactly that. I don't know it's network, I don't know it is IT, it is the combination of the two. And we not only support it, obviously, but we are embracing and pushing for it. I also like to take another slight angle and comment on what Ignacio said. We see every tier one carrier somehow engaged at some level, but we see tier two and tier three moving incredibly aggressively because it's a matter of survival for them. And one area that seems to be very, over the past 12 months really, has exploded is the MVNE. MVNE and using cloud and cloud native as a way to power up the business, embrace new partners that are coming, 5G promise and really 4G actuality, and accelerating the onboarding of those partners and the launch of new services that really take advantage of the network infrastructure and the expanding network infrastructure. So all of that supports what the other panelists have said.
Great, thanks, Sebastiano. Heather, I'd like to bring this round to open source and open source communities. I guess there's different, if you call it flavors, maybe there's slightly different flavors of cloud native and the implementation. Do all telcos, tier 1, 2, 3s, do they all have to align with developers and enterprises and the work they are doing? Do telcos really need to get into the open source communities and kind of participate at that fundamental level, or is it absolutely sufficient and okay just to see what's going on with the enterprise market and developers and just take from that?
So, I mean, I think to a certain extent, and this goes back to, I think, yesterday's first panel, when, talking about sort of insourcing more versus maybe just outsourcing, everything. We're seeing different business models in terms of that. And I think to a certain extent, it depends on where you go in that camp, because if you're going to insource more, you're going to reap so much more value if you're engaged in the technology development and discussion, right? And so you have to understand the technology, you have to understand the promises and the challenges of it in terms of being involved in open source. So, if like an Orange or a Vodafone, you are planning to bring more in-house, I think, once again, you don't have a choice because you can't just leave it, to the supply chain to do it for you unless you're really making a choice, like, for example, outsourcing the core, of the network to a provider like Microsoft. At that point, you can perhaps rely on Microsoft as a partner to be more engaged in the open source. So I think it does align with those models of how much is going to be, insourced versus left to, someone else. And I will, not necessarily comment on, sort of which of those paths, an operator should take. But I think, if you're putting stuff in your network that you don't understand, that just seems foolish, shall we say, ill-judged, without being involved to like really understand it and get your hands dirty.
So there's one thing I need to step on that. No carrier on the face of the earth is going to outsource their network to a hyperscaler. It just doesn't happen. So what's going to happen is that people are going to choose to use technology that has scaled throughout multiple industries to help build their network. And when people talk about sort of building their own technology and insourcing, the question is, where are you going to spend your time, right? Every dollar, again, this is a services or anything, the carriers have to get, from my opinion, again, this is Sean talking, less Microsoft, because I spent, every dollar you put into building new product, every dollar you put into a network deployment, you ask yourself, is a customer getting value out of that? So if you're going to go build your own security framework or your own AI framework, instead of leveraging what somebody else has done at mass scale, ask yourself, is what you're putting in that so unique that you're going to make a return on that investment? And the answer is for many people, and again, this is specific to particular carriers, is that, to manage infrastructure and to manage the development pipeline, can I leverage stuff that's already done? That's paved road? Can I just do that? Awesome. And then does that mean I can leverage my knowledge of the local market, what's specific to the industries that I serve, and build upper layer services and offer any to differentiation? Is that where I'm going to put my investment dollars? I would argue that's where the survival, and this is back to what Sebastiano and others are saying, that's where the survival industry comes, is not going to Mobile World Congress and seeing everything exactly the same in every booth, right? Like, 1 year it's flying cars, the next year it's virtual reality dancing, right? Awesome. Now, if there are markets where those are super relevant. But hopefully, next time I go, I want to see something totally different in every place, because every operator is building a different stack of services. Because they've moved away from sort of trying to redesign the individual bits which they can leverage, and they've moved to launching new and innovative services.
Yeah, I'll come to Ignacio first, and then Arnaud will have a chat.
Going back to the open source communities, I think it's first, innovation is coming from them. So if you really want to know what are you doing, and first what you have to address going forward, you have to be there. But for me, it's something more important, which is you can also influence. So if you are part of the community, you can share with them what are your needs, what are your requests, and you don't need to create, let's say, like special rooms only for telco. You can share with the rest of the communities what are your needs, what are your requirements, because in most of the cases could be common. But because at the end of the day, this is what it's about. Innovation to overcome all of the complexity and all of the issues in terms of revenue generation and so on that telcos are addressing and facing today.
And to that point, I mean, when I sort of first started with OPNFV back in the day, and it was original NFV use cases, and the operators were saying, well, we can't do it because OpenStack doesn't do this, or we can't do this because Kubernetes doesn't do that. I'm like, well, it can. You just have to get involved, describe your business case and the technical constraints. And we saw over time that sort of these things that operators needed being not something telecom snowflake special, but really built into the core of the open source, sort of technology. And so once again, getting involved in the open source is, to your point, you can influence, you can make it work for your needs, but not if you're standing on the sidelines going, I don't like this. You really do have to sort of get involved. And the nice thing too is, we were talking yesterday about, addressing the developer community as operators. You're going to be standing shoulder to shoulder with the developers, and so you can use that to build those relationships, increase your brand as a place for cloud native developers to come work. I mean, there are a lot of sort of halo benefits that are sometimes hard to quantify in a business model initially from the outset, but you do get so much back.
Great, thanks Heather. Arnaud, what's your strategy here?
In fact, it's the same question, do you participate to standardization? Because on network side, we have been quite successful in standardization. When I look to 3GPP and the defragmentation, interoperability that was promoted. And now that we are in the software world, we need to complement that in places where we can share elements, and that's open source by definition, where the standard elements you share and you just focus to the part where you can differentiate for a company, for a software player or an operator. And I think that two elements are important. It's what we have seen, for example, as well on the RAN with 3GPP and the O-RAN Alliance to complement this interoperability, cloudification, and automation. So I do believe, and for at least tier one operator, it's quite important to continue to participate in standardization and open source. It's as well to master the technology, to have your needs included. Sometimes you have some specificities. I mentioned for Europe this trusted and secure connectivity with cyber security toolbox requirement. So it's very important for us to promote that. And by the way, it's not finished because, as I mentioned, we have today a real difficulty to decouple the network cloud application compared to the infrastructure, even in a cloud native environment. So there is lots of work to be done, and we need to avoid the silos. And of course, we are really promoting everyone to contribute in open source project like Silva.
Yeah, thanks, Arnaud. Partha, has this been your strategy as well, and your experience, and basically the importance of community collaboration and being shoulder to shoulder with developers, whether in the telecom sector or outside the sector?
So first of all, I think all of us will agree violently that we have to be part of the community. Standardization is important and all that. Absolutely, right? You need to have interoperability with other vendors, software and all that. Let's kind of step back. Okay, let's just do a thought experiment here. With all the talk about OpenStack and all that, which company made the most money? VMware, right? So this is actually a very controversial topic, because while standardization is important, it is also important to understand that as a customer, a telco operator has to be focused on, am I getting the value for my money? Is there a return on my investment? Can I get this done faster, right? So if you have to go down that path, you have to leverage things that are not standardized yet, because standardization at some point goes towards the lowest common denominator. How do you take the innovations that are coming from the vendors and use that to your advantage? When I say yours, the operator's advantage. That is a question that needs to be asked alongside, how do I get interoperability through standardization? I know it's a controversial topic, but I think it's a very important topic to discuss, because going back to this thing about, I think Sean or somebody was mentioning about DIY and all that, I would basically say, if it's not core to your business, I know it's great to aspire to be essentially developers, a telco should stay away from all these things. Telco should be focused on one and only one thing. How do I deliver high quality network at the cheapest possible price for myself as well as to the customer, right? And if they think that, just like the hyperscalers have figured out that if they build things themselves, they can deliver on this value, more power to you. You should go and do it. Otherwise, I think you should take a very pragmatic approach. Otherwise, it's just going to be a lot of noise without a lot of results. So.
Thanks, Partha. Sebastiani, I feel you
well,
something to this.
No, let me tell you why. Because the way I'm thinking the job. I agree with you. I think you touched a couple of very good points. But the way I'm thinking the role of Arnaud, and he knows it, is actually a chief innovation officer. I mean, his title is CTIO, and that's what he manages day by day. But his job is how to enable innovation. to the rest of the company, right? Innovating himself in his business, but innovating the rest of the company so that the business adds velocity, which is the one thing that the telco haven't seen ever. Yeah, because I live in the valley. Whenever I say telco is a bad word, right? In the Silicon Valley, don't say your telco. Don't say that, right? And when you say your telco, people expect you to go, they hug you, and they expect you to cry on their shoulder, right? So that's kind of the way. Because the speed at which the valley moves is just 5 orders of magnitude to the speed at which the telco moves, and for a number of good reasons. I'm not saying that. So that's important because what is happening? People are innovating on the shoulders of the telcos and eventually making some money. And when I say, if I say humane, that doesn't mean anything, but it is HU.MA.NE. Just watch what is happening with humane. This is a company founded by Imran Chaudhry. It's one of the guys that worked on the interface of the iPhone. And if you're interested, he made a tech talk a couple of weeks ago. Just to take a look at it, I can't say much, but that is innovation that takes, by the way, AI, cloud, and the network all together and brings a completely different experience. That's how you build a business, right? All of the rest, and that's unfair because there is a ton of work and a ton of people, needs to be totally transparent, right? The best work of Arnaud is that he becomes seamless and totally transparent, which is a sort of not a good thing, but it is a good thing because it's how you enable innovation, how do you enable business to go fast. Cloud is obviously an enabler to do with that, and in my personal opinion, and that's what I said, it's a market is an answer that the market has already given, and then from a software provider standpoint, that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Great. Thanks, Sebastiano. And if Sophie's in the room watching, we should have some T-shirts made up next year with Hug a Telco. I think it's very, very popular. Right, we're going to do that. Sorry, why don't we develop what we've just been discussing here, which is another talking point we've got, which is, is there a, if I want to use the word problem, is there a problem with standards? I've got to be careful what I say here. But is the traditional approach restricting the development of cloud-native telco solutions? Can both worlds be better aligned? Is this something we need to concern ourselves about? Is it an issue? Arnaud, have you any thoughts?
No, I don't see the issue. Perhaps the life cycle is very different because in a standard, what you are looking for is to have evolution of a global system. And there, of course, it's very important because if you want a device to be sold everywhere on the planet, same if you want to reduce the energy CO2 footprint, we need these places to compromise and to have, let's say, one global system. And we were very pleased for 5G not to have different 5G on different continents, and we need to continue to push this consensus for 6G. It's not so obvious. In every generation, you could have one country, one actor that would like to differentiate, but then to disrupt the model. And on the other side, because of this software open source, it's really a gradual improvement, test and learn perspective, and so you can diverge and you can, let's say, not apply anymore the standard. So I think it's very important in the way we structure the community to really align both worlds and make sure it's what we are doing, for example, between O-RAN Alliance and 3GPP to take back things and to make sure you have a system definition and then the way to implement it from a cloudification perspective, from automation perspective.
I mean, I think for me, it's the ensuring that sort of standards work and open source implementation of standards are very, sort of together, I mean, in some of our early days of NFV, some of the standards were obviously written by people who don't understand how to write software, right? And that, caused some, I think, initial hiccups. But, going back to your, example of 3GPP and O-RAN Alliance, and then also O-RAN SC within Linux Foundation, O-RAN is sort of split, sort of into two entities, but very related in terms of the sort of specification and standardization evolution and then the open source implementation of it. And so I think when you have that working together, you can take advantage of, sort of what you get, from a specification or a standard, and Silva and Anuket, we have, sort of people who write specifications and some people who implement, the reference implementation of that. And I think that is proving to be, I think, a model that works for us in networking is, having it more hand in hand so that, software design, is done by people who understand software, and then, APIs and interfaces, kind of back to that, camera and open API discussion, yesterday, it's just, a lot more interaction so that you get the best of what each can bring.
Great, thanks.
And by the way, I should mention we have Anita in the room, the great work done in NGMN, because if you have today one 5G, you are right, it was because we were able some years ago to align in this forum. If not, we will have 2 or 3 5G today. So really thanks, Anita, for your great contribution to the ecosystem.
Thank you, Anita. And we'll see you this afternoon for another session. We'll hear more about it then. Sean, from your speaking as Sean, with the 2 hats, and your previous hat and your current hat, do you ever see problems with, as Arnaud says, there's different time scales here, there's different time frames between...
We touched a lot on this yesterday, and what I think, when we were talking about the Kamar Alliance, and I actually think that the Kamar Alliance, I was really happy with the way that worked out, because I think it's actually a really practical way of looking at things in terms of, they said, we're going to get a mass of operators together, maybe not everyone, but a decent-sized representative sample of operators together. We're going to go experiment with some stuff. And we're going to get a framework we agree on. We're going to pull in the whole ecosystem, right? So we had, it was the operators, it was the hyperscalers, it's a lot of participants in that. And then we're going to go out and see what hunts. And then once we see what hunts, we'll go back and standardize that. And I think that's a very practical way of doing things. When I see people launch, standards in advance of the technology, I think Partha is absolutely right. By the way, I think Partha is absolutely right about a lot of things. Just because I teased him at the beginning. You can't, at the front end, there's not going to wait, right? I live in the Valley too. None of those guys are going to wait. And if you say, hey, you can't implement your technology in my stack until you adhere to these standards, they'll probably tell you, sure, it's on the roadmap at some point, maybe, if you pay me a bunch to do it. Whereas when it emerges as the de facto standard, which is the process that we're using to build mass around that, then you get adoption. And it's not, to me, it's not super theoretical, it's just very practical. Look at the way things have emerged for the last 30 years. Is there something that's going to be different than the next 10 in the way that we approach this? Not really. It's all emerged de facto adoption, with some exceptions. And so I think that, the way that they've approached it in the Kamar side has been very, very practical.
That's good to hear.
Actually, I want to add to what Sean mentioned, right? That it's very important as an operator when you're picking your vendor. It's very important to recognize that while they have to adhere to standards, just adhering to standards does not solve the problems for the operator. They have to launch their network. They have to launch it in the most cost-efficient manner, right? At some point, you have to essentially figure out where the cutoff is going to be. How much are you going to be a purist when it comes to standards? Because it takes time for vendors to also really get to that point where they're adhering to all the standards, and for the standards to evolve too, right? So I think being pragmatic is very important, while standards are as important, right?
I just, hearing this, it just also reminds me sort of when we really started like standardization, and networking, back in the original IETF, it was not wait till everything's perfect. It was rough consensus, not perfect agreement on every single point. It was rough consensus and running code, and I think a lot of the standards bodies sort of for a while perhaps forgot that. And I think, sort of the move to software has just reminded us that, that is when standards work best, that pragmatic, rough consensus, iterate, running code, rather than extremely expensive technical documentation that you write around the world.
Thanks, Heather. Any other comments, or we should take this opportunity to ask our audience, because I'm sure the past 10 minutes has generated some strong feelings, so there must be someone who wants to put a question to us. I'm sure I saw an extra question earlier on, actually. Oh, come on, Francis. I can see you. You're right into the light.
I think Partha made a very key statement at the beginning, which is we need to be very clear about our terminology here. And there's a degree in this conversation and in the one earlier where we confuse a lot of concepts with the same word, effectively. How much do you think that we need to be much clearer about what is cloud, what is cloud native, what is the difference between a public cloud technology, what is the difference between a public cloud business model, what is the difference between cloud native being used to better deliver what a telco does today versus what is cloud native in terms of allowing a telco to innovate and deliver more in the future. I think these things all get very confused. I'm just interested in, from the point of view, is what can we do to actually just be a little bit clearer about our language and not attach everything is AI, everything is cloud. Would that help?
Thanks, Francis. Arnaud, do you want to sort of comment first?
Of course, in many domains you have a different terminology and so on. I think on this one it's quite clear because we had this different step, VNF, CNF, on the telco sector, so and even some open source based reference. So we have a different elements. It's more on the business model perhaps that you could have attention. Because you have, of course, different interests. If you have a worldwide perspective for your software, so you just push that, and then with a certain terminology. If you want just to make sure, us as Orange, that what we are deploying is standard, interoperable, and so on, because we need, at the end, the network to run. We have 50, 80 pieces that has to run together in a daily life. So we cannot afford not to have interoperability. So it's where, yes, we could have tensions. For us, of course, we want to scale. And what is important is for all our operation to have the same reference design and to be able to de-risk the implementation of these new technologies. And of course, in an affordable TCO perspective, because we want to monetize our infrastructure. In our Lead the Future, the main things for us, it's really fiber activation, 5G SAO opening, coverage in Africa. So really we want to give the best to our customers. So of course terminology is important. By the way, we are working a lot on IT, on terminology, because in network we have quite a good terminology. On IT side, we still need to have a same terminology like what we do in TM Forum right now. But yes, I fully understand your point to communicate more on the business model, public, private, because it could be confusing outside our ecosystem.
Yes. Yeah, to me, when we talk about cloud, we're talking about, let's say, where are you going to put your workloads or your CNFs. Okay, it could be in a public environment, could be in a private environment, or could be either way. So to me, when someone is talking about the concept of cloud, what I understand in my mind is about in which environment do you want to deploy, right? When it talks about cloud native, there are many definitions of cloud native, but to me, service-based microservices, APIs, containers, Kubernetes, call it as you want it, and maybe automation or DevSecOps. That's for me ticking the box, but there are different elements there. One then is what is the technology, cloud native, and what should be the different technologies included there. The other is the environment where you are deploying your network.
Thank you. And Partha, did you want to say something here?
Sure. I think the question was around how to the entire ecosystem, right? Essentially familiarize ourselves with the terminology and what to use, right? What terminology to use. First of all, we are living in a very noisy world, right? Too many abbreviations, too many catchphrases, and there's something new that always comes up, and AI, right? If you add 2 columns in Excel, now people are calling that AI, right? It's very unfortunate. But I think the way I would look at it is, it's important for you to understand the why behind, before the what and how, the why, right? The operators or vendors, right, they should know why cloud native is needed. Not what is cloud native first. Why is it needed? Why is AI needed? Is it because it's the most fashionable thing right now? Not, right? Because AI is needed because there's so much of data that's flowing in your network. Maybe you could mine that to essentially extract insights that could drive down your cost, improve your agility, right? Make you more secure. So understanding that why, I think, is very important. But how many whys can you really chase? So for that, I think you need to figure out what are the trends, right? Cloud native is a trend now. AI is a trend now. And then just focus on that, and that will allow the operator or the partners or the analyst to essentially ask the right questions of the partners, of the vendors, and so on. So I think that's how I would approach this.
Thanks, Partha. Sebastiano?
No, I agree. I think the why is probably the most important thing. I was just thinking something Francesca said yesterday in one panel that said, you should be, I think she said should be nice to the operator because we have this problem, that problem, kind of a plethora of problems. And I said, yeah, I can be nice, but choose one problem to solve. You can't solve them all. Pick one, and the why will allow you to understand which technology can help you solve what problem and why you want to do that, right? That's kind of very simple. You're not gonna, I think from the operator standpoint, every time you get this, massive amount of things, and it says, pick one, guys, pick one. That is meaningful, obviously, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sebastiano. This is going to be our last question, I think. So, any Sean, do you know any comments about? Do we need to press pause here and just double check what it is that comes out of our mouths? Not you personally, of course.
No, I will help him. Just, you're fully right. You need to choose one or two topics that are important for you. That's why in the future we say network monitoring, network change. We want automation level 4, and for that we need cloud automation. We need AI for these elements. We need, and it's the way we structure our plan to reach in 2025 this objective. And it's not an easy objective.
No, it's not. It takes a risk. Making a choice is risky, right? Absolutely. And that's why I feel for your job and your role, right? Absolutely. And I have profound respect for what you're doing. But it's pick why and drive that one choice, and then drive that throughout the company.
And it helps us to monetize the infrastructure. That is the business objective.
Yeah.
So one observation, so out of all this, the terminology, the different approaches, the different definitions, in the end, implement enough cloud-native techniques, like Partha described, to get to the point where you're able to experiment with new services quickly, and if they don't work, fail, and it doesn't end your career because you've deployed $50 million in capital you can't reuse. So find a methodology to stand stuff up quick, do software-based solutions you can take to market, see if they add value. If they don't, move on, and get to the point where you can reliably deliver new features to your customer to keep them engaged with your product, to drive adoption and keep them going quickly. And then when you've done that, you've done enough, right? Like that, outcome end in mind is getting to a model where the operator community can deliver new and refreshed services that people truly love. People truly love their phone, right? They don't truly love the operator that makes that phone possible. When the operators get to the point where they're delivering services in such a way that people love the operator as well, which is what I aspire, which we all hopefully aspire to, will succeed. And those tools that we mentioned are techniques to get there that work other places.
Great, well said, Sean. Thank you very much indeed. I think we are almost out of time, so I'd just like to say thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in our discussion. But before we go, we do need to have a look at the poll we've been running for this session and see what the latest voting looks like. I know it's early days. We've just opened this poll up, so already, look at that, make real cultural changes throughout the organization. As we've been saying for a number of years now, understandably, that's top of the pile at the moment, but we'll be keeping these polls open. All our polls for these 2 days will keep open all week, and then we'll analyze the results next week. Right, we do need to leave it there. Thank you again. Just a reminder to everybody in the room, lunch is being served in about 60 seconds time, hopefully outside. Don't forget the charity pinball tournament. I am told this is your final chance to take part in the actual tournament itself, because the competition ends just after lunch. See you back here when we'll be starting our special afternoon dedicated to the Green Network. But first, let's thank all our panelists. Thank you very much indeed.